I'm Mehta, Editor-in-Chief of Breaking Defense. I'm here with Valerie Insinna, our Pentagon and Air Force correspondent. We're here at the Reagan National Defense Forum on a lovely Saturday in Simi Valley, California. We're going to break down some of the big trends that we've heard from a day of conferences and speeches. Val, I wanted to start talking about munitions, because this is an issue that we've heard a lot about over the last couple of months. Countries are concerned, as the U.S. is concerned, about being able to keep giving munitions to Ukraine while keeping national stockpiles at levels that they're comfortable with. What did you hear on this issue?
I think I've heard, some of the same things that we've been hearing for months now. The Pentagon needs to send a long-term signal to industry about what it's going to need from the munitions industrial base. The Pentagon needs to let contracts to industry, and they need to do that faster. And the Pentagon also needs to figure out where there are vulnerabilities. That's something that the Pentagon's chief for acquisition, Bill LaPlante, he talked a little bit about today, that the Pentagon is doing deep dives into every program to try to figure out, okay, so where are our choke points? Is it ball bearings? Is it chips? Is it, electronics? But I think the consensus among everyone is that things are just not moving as quickly as they should. And if this were a real crisis that the U.S. was involved in, this is something that could leave us very vulnerable. Yeah,
there's no silver bullet here.
Yeah, absolutely not.
All right. So next topic that's a big one and timely is the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA. This was expected to be completed last week, and then there seemed to be some delays. We've seen some Republicans, potential Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy has said he thinks maybe it should be delayed. A number of Republican senators last week came out and said because of the vaccine mandate, they want to see it potentially delayed or scuttled. What was the vibe on this? Because I think it seemed more positive than maybe we would have expected.
Yeah, I think people are pretty optimistic. Congressman Adam Smith, he is the leader of the House Armed Services Committee. He is famously not usually a very optimistic person, but he sounded a much more positive note today, saying that he thinks the NDAA will be ready on Monday, that it could be passed, by God's will by the end of the week. Senator Wicker, who is potentially going to become the ranking Republican on the Senate Armed Services Committee, he also sounded very optimistic about the NDAA's progress through both chambers. I think there is a little bit more concern about the defense spending bill. Senator Wicker, he talked a little bit about how this could potentially be very detrimental to the Defense Department, to the tune of about $80 billion if a spending bill is not passed, and if the department has to continue along on a continuing resolution that caps spending at last year's rates.
Yeah, and obviously Wicker pointed out, I think probably correctly, that if that happened, that wouldn't be great for the U.S., but would probably be welcomed by America's potential adversaries, Russia and China. What's your... Russia and China, again, they're going to dominate any sort of discussion at a conference like this. What I found kind of interesting was that while Russia was brought up a lot, China still seems like it's primary in people's minds.
I think that's absolutely true. I think that you saw that a lot in Secretary Austin's speech today. He talked at length about how China remains the pacing threat, with Russia being an acute threat, repeating the same sort of rhetoric that we've heard from the National Defense Strategy. And I think we heard that from department officials down the line, just that constant repetition of China being the major threat here. And I also think that's interesting that even though, the situation in Ukraine is getting a ton of focus, it's not completely sucking the air out of the room so that China is being ignored. Instead, I think what we're seeing is that people are looking at Ukraine and looking at what they're seeing from Russia and saying, okay, what can we actually apply here to the China problem? What is actually applicable to a Taiwan scenario?
Well, and we've heard Frank Kendall and others say, the Air Force Secretary Frank Kendall say, we know China's watching and they're looking to learn lessons too. So that seems to be part of the conversation as well.
Absolutely.
All right, so that's kind of the big takeaways from the conference. Thank you all for following along. We'll have a lot more content on breakingdefense.com going forward in the next couple of days. Thanks for watching. I'm Mehta.